Hello, my name is Stephanie Thornton. This is Carry On Creating, and today we're going to talk about Len. So a lot of you, most of you, won't know who Len Dance is, but it's very important to me to honour Len in this way on this podcast, as really he deserves all the credit for where I am, what I'm doing, and who I became in the photographic industry. A little bit of history. I won't go into the deep details of who Len is and was. There's so much out there about that, and I'm sure it's going to come up on other podcasts. But essentially, Len Dance was an amazing photographer. He was a press photographer, an architectural photographer, a portrait photographer, a celebrity photographer. He was so many things. And unfortunately, we recently lost Len just before Christmas. He was also my mentor. Len was the owner of the main first studio I worked for. I worked for another studio beforehand, but he was the owner of the main first studio. He gave me my big break. He taught me so much about lighting, about photography, about ethics, about life. I mean, Len really was an inspiration, and he's the reason I feel so strongly about teaching and giving back to everyone, but the youth of tomorrow, the next generation of photographers. Len gave me a break when I was 16. I started when I was 14 in a different studio, but when I was 16, Len gave me my first big break, and it changed everything. And I wasn't the only person. I wasn't special. He gave other people chances too. A lot didn't pan out, but for the person it did, for me, it changed my entire life. And that's exactly why, no matter how many times I'll be let down by students and apprentices and people who are interested in learning photography, and you give them a break, you chat to them, you teach them for years, and you don't see anything from it. For someone, if I could be Len to anyone, that does mean a lot to me. And not only that, it's not an ego thing. It's actually just it would feel wrong not to. I mean, Len went out of his way to teach me, to put that effort in, and to really give me every opportunity to succeed. He knew that the success was at the end of the day down to me and no one else. It was only me that was going to be able to. Well, it was only me that was going to be able to make myself successful. But he pushed me. He did a lot for me. So this is all about Len. And the day I met Len, actually, I've got to go back a few weeks before, because I was waitressing on a weekend at a little deli that is no longer there, so I can say it was awful and I hated the job a lot. It was terrible. The kitchen staff yelled at the deli staff, and the students, me and my friend Leah at the time, just got yelled at constantly. And I mean, I don't remember if anyone else had the same sort of feelings as I did, because I don't think we talked about it, but I hated it. There was times I just sort of used to go into the toilet, sit, and just go, "Oh my god," and then have to compose myself and get back out there. And I already knew I wanted to be a photographer. I knew that from a young age, and it was a studio down the road. The studio down the road had a beautiful picture in it, and I can only describe it because I don't think I'll ever find this picture, of a girl laid down on the floor in a really nice position, looking straight at the camera with beautiful long hair, wearing a red top, and they'd edited like a clock into the background. It sounds weird now, looked really relevant at the time. It had a bit of color pop. The image was desaturated. The red was quite vibrant. And I loved the lighting on this. I didn't actually even like the color pop. I didn't like a lot of it, but I loved the lighting. And I'd only ever really been introduced to white background, flat lighting before, and seeing this picture, I was obsessed. I loved it. So I went and I knocked on the door, and this lady answered, and I said about I'm a student and I'm looking for a job. We don't take on students. Okay. And I went away. And then 2 weeks later, I thought, I'm going to do it again. And I went and knocked on. I don't know why I went again, but a different lady answered, and she was very smiley, very lovely. I now know who these ladies are because I ended up working with them. But she said, "Oh no, I'm really sorry, we don't have any positions or anything at the moment." And I was like, "Okay, thank you." A few weeks later, apparently I'm crazy because I decided to go back again, and this time I knocked on the door, and this man came to the door, and he had this beautiful warm smile and just welcomed me in. He was so friendly, he was so lovely, and he wanted to listen, and he wanted to encourage me. And this was Len. This was Len. This was Len Dance, whose name was above the door, and he told me about how he started. And I wasn't stupid, he told me about how he started working in a press office, and he worked his way up, and there was no jobs for him, and he was too young, and they didn't know him, and all this stuff. And eventually they needed someone to cover a job, and he'd been working in the lab. And they said, well, Len can do it. And the owners, said, well, no, Len's too young. He's not trained. He hasn't come from this qualification, blah, 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 blah. And they said, but Len already knows. He's been here. He's put his work in. He knows what it takes. And I thought, well, yeah, I get that, because I will put the work in. I want to be that person to get the job. At this time in my life, I was getting ready to, I was at college, I was starting college, and I was, I suppose, getting ready to think about university and think about where I wanted to be. And I didn't want to be in education. I didn't thrive in education, and I wanted to get out into the real world. But no, I needed a degree to do photography and all sorts of things. So I knew that I was having to work my way up, and he told me this story, and I thought, well, I will do that. And I said, well, can I come in? Can I do things? Can I help? Can I do anything? And he said, yes, absolutely. And he said about coming in on Saturdays and Sundays, but he made the studio available to me whenever I wanted it, providing I could, be of use. He gave me free rein to learn. Now, this wasn't for me to start my own small business, or to try and profit from it, or get all my friends and family in and do photo shoots. He gave it to me for me to grow and learn as a photographer. And that's what I did. I did get friends in, but I practiced. I did crazy themed shoots. I tried different lighting techniques, and I kept it in my head that, if I can just learn one thing at a time, I will slowly grow. And don't get me wrong, I was 17, 16, 17. I had an ego, and I wanted to be told I was good, of course. But I grew bit by bit from having access to the studio. Soon after, Len and I became inseparable friends, and were going to events. And I remember so many. There's 101 stories I can tell you about Len, but I remember one time he called me and went, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Nothing." And he said, "Right, I'm coming to get you. We're going out." Okay. And I got ready, and I didn't know where we were going. And he came and picked me up, and we drove to a photographer called Kevin's house, who was not local to us. It was quite a drive. It was hours away. But Len decided, no, I decided that it would be good for you to meet Kevin. It would be good for him to know who you are. He runs this, and this. He's part of, at the time, I think it was a British Institute. And I think that's good for you. And he just decided that one day, that was good for me, and that he was going to spend his time doing that. And it was incredible. I supported him in different events in his life, where there was a couple of industry organizations who were honouring him, and he was actually turning down the award as he felt that he had witnessed something that he didn't believe fit with the ethics. He was very strong on his morals and his ethics of photography, of what photography is, what it means, and what qualifications and awards should mean. And he did not feel that the organization was keeping up to date with how that should be. I mean, this is over a decade ago now, but he felt very strongly, and he told me beforehand that he was going to turn down this honorary award, and could I be there for moral support? And I was. And classic Len, afterwards when he was emotional about doing what he did, he was surrounded by women. Len was always surrounded by women, and he graciously turned down. He said his piece, and he got quite emotional afterwards. And it meant a lot to be there for that moment, more so than it meant to probably be there for some of the really cool stuff. So he took me to the London Portrait Group, introduced me to them, which changed my absolute life because it gave me somewhere to learn photography from professionals, somewhere to compete, to hone my skills, to make friends. It gave me so many things, so much so that actually that's why I started doing workshops up north, because I missed the London Portrait Group so much. I wanted really badly to have that kind of community again, which has been amazing. And Len gave me that. He introduced me to, I mean, I can name so many absolutely incredible photographers he introduced me to, but the one I would have to put on a pedestal is Barry Latigan, who, well, he will tell you himself, he discovered Twiggy, and was a Vogue photographer of the 60s, and beyond being an amazing character, was just an amazing photographer, amazing talent, and an amazing vision for what he wanted. So all this sort of stuff was part of my early development into photography, and that's all thanks to Len. Len, very soon after me starting working there, decided he was going to retire. He had this on the cards for a long time, and it was actually my dad that bought the studio off of him. Len said about him wanting to retire, and I did sort of have this thought to myself of, oh no, I can't. What if I have another boss, someone who's not you? I wanted to keep things the same, and I remember very quickly sort of saying to Len, I might know someone who's interested. And going back, my dad was always interested in photography, and the idea of owning a studio had been a bit of a dream of his. So sort of connecting the two together felt like a good idea. So it was nice to sort of keep that support network, and Len stuck around to help me as I became sort of manager as such of the studio within years, to help out and offer his advice. And as he retired, and we had lunch often. We always went up. I think the place was called Relish in Leigh-on-Sea. Not that it matters, but I can't quite remember. And we always had the same things. And he would have a Pinot Grigio, and we would talk about life, and we would talk about what we're doing and what's going on. And I would talk about challenges that I'm facing and how I want to go. And it didn't really matter what he said, because just a lunch with Len was inspiration. Just a lunch with Len made me feel that I could achieve anything, and that it wasn't easy. He didn't feed my ego, but he gave me that belief that I could do it and I could follow in his footsteps. And I'll be honest, at the time, I wanted to follow in his footsteps and be a recognized, not a press photographer like him, but a recognized photographer. The industry hasn't really gone down that route these days, but I wanted the respect that he had in the industry, and I didn't want it handed to me. I didn't want to feel like I deserved it because I've done this, I've done that. And that's something with this industry that these days, like, there's so many egos. God, photographers are just all egos, and it's exhausting. And so many, I mean, I'm part of the British Institute of Professional Photography. I'm also part of the MPA. I'm part of the RPS. I've been part of all these organisations, and every single one of them has egos that get involved. They've just got into photography, normally from another career, normally engineering of some sort, and they put everything into this new organization, or new to them. They put everything into it and they climb the ranks. And quite honestly, they don't hone their skill as photographers. They don't become incredible photographers. Maybe they develop a small style of some sort in one niche, but they just make themselves useful, grow and grow and grow. And they then think that they're some top end photographer, that they're known in the industry, and really they've just sort of offered to help at the right time and made themselves available. They haven't honed their skill, and they haven't earned the accreditation of being respected in the way they'd want to, the way they think, the David Bailey kind of way, to be respected. And I've seen it so many times where they come and they crash and burn because they just sort of vanish. And I've seen them try to start their own organizations. I've seen them get in temper tantrums and Facebook posts. And my God, I'm going on a rant about this now, but this is something that is very relevant to our industry. And I knew that. I was aware of that even in my early days. And Len was everything that wasn't. He had an ego, but he earned it. And he had an ego and a respect because he respected everybody else, and he built everyone else up. If you built up him, his ego took you with him. He was fabulous. And our industry needs more people like Len, more people who give back because they just believe in giving back. They don't want to ask what's in it for me. And we need more people like him. And he didn't really teach me actually a lot of photography. That sounds terrible, but he did retire quite soon after me starting with him on reflection, and he gave me a few lessons in lighting, a few things, but actually a lot of it was him encouraging me to learn and grow and try new things, way more than it was him showing me techniques. And that really did a lot, because he was encouraging me to be creative, not showing me how I should be doing something. And that was quite impactful for me. And actually, again, bringing it all the way full circle as to why this podcast is called Carry On Creating, it is all about being a creative person and being creative. And you can't be creative if you're just following the motions and doing the steps and whatever. You can only be creative if you are creating. You are putting things together in an order for a reason and for a purpose. That's my personal definition of creating something. It's deliberate. You're making a deliberate choice. And Len let me do that. He let me do that in his studio. He was kind enough to give me hours. And I mean, one story I'd love to share was I was going through a particularly hard time. It's probably about 19, maybe, yeah, probably about 19, 20. And Len was someone I knew I could call on. I was at the studio. It was about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, midnight, maybe. Like it is now. I was working late, and I just felt this overwhelming anxiety all of a sudden. On reflection, I suppose it was a panic attack. I don't really know at the time what it was, but I had so much to do. I was doing qualifications. I was doing a million things. I was dealing with life as a young person, and I just felt so overwhelmed. And I had this sort of panic attack, and no one was with me. I was completely on my own in the studio, and I rang Len. I have no idea what I said. I was in some sort of state, but I said I needed him, and he came out, and he came to get me, and he came to the studio. He came to make sure I was okay, and he talked through it, and he didn't even stay that long necessarily. He fixed things so quickly, and he understood mental health. I don't even think he knew he understood that, but he looked after me. He made sure I was okay. He made sure I knew that he'd felt this way, and he'd had his own battles with things, and he'd suffered with stuff, and he really, really helped me through that night. And I remember thinking how much that meant, that when he said, "You can call on me at any time," he really did mean that. He really did mean it. And I don't know, without putting that to the test, you don't really ever know how many people you have in your life who would do that. When it really comes down to it, who would really be there for you. And he didn't live close. He wasn't far, but he didn't live close. And he really did come out his way to get me. A few weeks, months, I suppose, later than that, he asked to take me out for lunch, as we did often. And he took me out to lunch. And he said, "I've got something to ask you." And I said, "Yep, ask away." And he asked me to speak at his funeral. And that was something very strange to be asked when you're in your early 20s. And Len was a character. Len had a lot of friends. Len knew a lot of people. So quite honestly, my immediate thought was, he's not just asked me, he's asking a lot of other people this. People who mean a lot to him. And it didn't really occur to me of anything. But I said yes. I said I would. And I didn't keep that promise. Because when it came to it, it felt intrusive to Len's family to have ever even mentioned that. But I decided I would keep my promise in the way of, I would talk to everyone at the funeral as best I could, respectfully, about Len and about who he was to me. And I did get to talk to most people and some of the family, and a lot of photographers. Obviously, I knew a lot of people there. And I joked with Ray Lowe that knowing Len, this is something he asked multiple people, and that I didn't take the request as something too seriously, as a demand. I sort of, I took it in heart. And Ray, in his way, sort of just said he didn't bloody ask me. that proper tickled me, because Ray and Len were very, very close, and that if anyone, I would imagine he would have. In fact, Ray and I had a sort of understanding, I suppose, for a long time, that if anything happened to Len, that we would contact each other, which we did. It just made me laugh. That just made me laugh about it. So yeah, I think this is my way of speaking at his funeral. I couldn't have stood up and spoke for 20 minutes and said this actually at his funeral. And in a way, I think Len would have preferred this method to be addressed to photographers, for people to listen. Not only that, to be put in a podcast of something that's, immortalizing him forever. I do plan on actually talking to other photographers about Len for other episodes of this podcast down the line, and Ray being one of them. And I think Len would love that. I think Len would love his stories to live on forever. He was a storyteller, and he was an inspiration, and he never stopped surprising me with his stories. I studied film studies as well as photography at college, and I became a big fan of Hitchcock. And one of the things we studied was how Psycho was so scary. Their promotional material was actually, they didn't even show any of the film. they were so clever. They actually showed, I don't think they were allowed to show any of the film. They just showed the audience's reaction to the film. And that always stuck with me, that was such a clever marketing ploy as well, actually. But such a clever way of doing it, that the photos of the reactions was what got people to watch the film. And talking with Len one day, he talked about when he had lunch with Alfred Hitchcock. And I just did this double take. Went, you what? You had lunch with Hitchcock? Are you kidding me? I went, yes. He said, when I did the photos for Psycho. And he went, you what? What? And he said about this story of going to lunch with Hitchcock because they needed someone who understood photography to such a degree that they could deal with taking pictures in a cinema where the light was constantly changing because there was only the light from the screen there anyway. And he somehow, his name, I don't remember the whole story, got passed around. And I don't think he ever realized how much that impressed me. And this was years after meeting Len. This wasn't new. He could have mentioned this a lot sooner, but didn't. And that was just iconic to me that he did that. And that was Len. It was so many stories and lifetimes and so many things and stories that should be told. And he was this Cockney. I should have mentioned that he was this sort of Cockney sort of Londoner. And he was just brilliant. He was absolutely amazing. And I hope that this does him justice. And I hope that I hope this is okay. I hope I'm doing him justice and doing him proud, because he really was someone special. And he affected a lot of people. At the funeral, the stories that I heard from people was, said a lot. And it was very important for me to go. I made sure I could attend. I know a lot of people traveled very far. And it was hard to lose your mentor. Even though we weren't as in touch in his later days, he was ill, and I wish we'd been in touch a bit more, but there was times he didn't really remember who I was anymore. But it's difficult to not have that person to go back to and talk to. So I think this is all I wanted to say was, Carry On Creating is a tribute to Len, to who Len was to me. And he would love this podcast. He would love the idea of something that's just there to get us through creating pandemics, mental health, mental blocks, to get us through whatever it is we're going through, and to keep us being the creative beings that we want to be. There's nothing more Len than that, really. So this is my little tribute, my piece, my speaking at his funeral, keeping a promise. I do feel like it's keeping a promise. I hope he would see it that way. And yeah, this is just my little piece about Len. And I will be bringing him up again. I will be talking to other photographers about who he was. Ray Lowe being one, and if he would allow it, Roy Wooding to be another. There's God knows how many photographers who could talk about Len, but those two are two that have also influenced my journey. And I would love to have a further discussion about who Len was. And there's Ivan and Michael and loads of other photographers. So I would really like to expand on this, even if it's just for us. But thank you for listening, if you're still here, and for joining me on this interesting version of Carry On Creating. But thank your mentors. If you don't have a mentor, thank whoever's helped you, inspired you, or just allowed you to be a creative. Say something to them. See you guys next time.